are live, I think. How's everybody doing this fine Wednesday evening, morning, afternoon, depending on where you're at? Real quick, because I've had many struggles, as you guys have known. Audio, does it sound like we're roughly in sync? Roughly in sync. Air horn, we definitely need an air horn with some decent software, but I've got a camera, so might as well hook it up, and I'll demo all that. I about 5 minutes before going live, set all this up, new soundboard. So I probably should have just continued on with the webcam to get all this figured out. But awesome, audio's good, great. Very excited to be with you guys and to have slightly better quality. And we're just going to keep working on this whole getting the live stream thing set up. My other goal is to use the camera here to record some of my videos, or at least part of my videos. I think that'd be a lot of fun. So today we are going to jump into hard drives, and we are going to cover pretty much everything you need to know, whether you're starting with something really small, shooting mobile, or setting up a pretty big setup. So the first thing I want to do is ask you guys, what is up with your scenario? Are you a YouTuber? Are you getting started with almost no hard drives and just need something to get you by? Are you doing lots of production and creating tons of content and need a place for that? So help me out and I'll make sure I can, more volume please. Okay, I can do that. How's that? Is that better? Sorry, rip everyone who's wearing headphones and just went up. Alrighty. Reading through the comments here. So do you guys do events where you have hours and hours of footage per project, or are they small projects where you're just doing some small stuff? Small stuff. I need speed, redundancy, something cheap and reliable. David, I'm going to get your back. We're going to talk about some great budget stuff for sure, and really, really redundant, safe backup stuff. Mostly freelance, YouTuber. All right, from Daniel. Tons of content weekly, crosswinds. Let's see. Okay, so a little bit of mix. A lot of people doing maybe smaller stuff, have lots of drives but need more storage for backups, small and large projects. Okay, awesome. So let's start with talking about the drives themselves, a couple pointers, things to look out for, and then we're going to jump into RAID enclosures, RAID configurations, the best one for your setup, redundancy and backup, because those are two very different things. And then we're going to get into, actually we're going to go to Amazon, we're going to throw some stuff in a cart and kind of talk about what this could actually look like instead of just theory. So let me pull up my list here. First and foremost, let's go over to Chrome and start looking at some hard drives. First thing is obviously capacity, and within that, you know, we've got a couple different options. We can go SSD, which is, and we're getting into speed now, kind of all over the place with this. So SSDs, wicked fast, right? Crazy expensive. So I would really only recommend SSDs if you are going to be using this for your OS, which will dramatically improve. If you're still using a spinning disk mechanical drive in your system, definitely get a SSD. I've had real good success with, I think it's SanDisk. It's around 84 bucks. It's a 120 or 250. That's a 500. But that's here we go. It's got to be in here. There we go. 250 gig. Great SSD to start out with. It isn't going to cost you an arm and a leg, and it'll work so great for your system. So that's SSD. Spinning, we have several different options. The one thing I always look for, and I'll just do this for you now. Let's just start with something simple. 1 terabyte hard drive. That's terrible. Let's go here. And when you're looking for a hard drive, there's a couple things you want to consider. The first is obviously the capacity. The second, low compared to other stuff you're looking at, you might want to consider that. The size, so there's 3.5 and 2.5 inch. Smaller ones are great because you can, if you have a PC that you're building, you can put multiple 2 inches or 2.5 inch drives in a one 3.5 inch drive. And then stuff that they won't always show you, and that is the speed. Usually that's read out in rotations per minute. So a good rule of thumb is don't get anything under 7,200 RPM. That's the base for what I look for. If you're going to do a backup setup, which we'll talk about later, which is just, it doesn't matter about speed, doesn't matter. You don't care if overnight it takes longer to back up. That you can go with something a little slower, like a 54, a 59, couple different options there. But usually I always recommend 7,200, and do keep in mind it goes higher than 7,200. So if we go back to our main search page on Amazon, we can go down here on the sidebar, and you'll notice there's a 10,000. So these are the Velociraptor, I just butchered that, from Western Digital. These are usually smaller capacities, 1 terabyte and under, I've found. They're a little more expensive, but you're getting really banging speeds for a drive setup. So that's something to go on reviews, and there's always some nerd out there who helps me out. Watch this be the only one where someone didn't do a review. Well, that's embarrassing. Almost always somebody has the speeds and they've tested the drive. So let's go back to our main original test. Go in here, reviews. Here we go. So right here, this guy has benchmarked, and there's usually a ton of these guys on here who will benchmark the drives for you. And you can start to get an idea of what your read and write speeds are going to look like, because that's really, really important. When we're done here, I'd recommend you pull down the Blackmagic disk drive utility or drive speed app. There you'll be able to test your current setup and see how fast it is. And after it's done testing, it'll actually give you numbers and say, all right, you're not going to be able to handle 4K with this current speed. So that's really, really helpful. And these numbers you can check. And what's crazy is you'll see numbers, they'll, like this is a Seagate drive, they'll give you numbers, but often it's like the maximum 1 millisecond where it actually hit those speeds. So you can't always trust those. So finding those in the comments or in the reviews, you'll usually find several people who have done those benchmarks for you. So that's what I always look for, because if I want a 1 terabyte and I want it really fast, not all 1 terabytes are the same. So that's kind of a couple different drive options. Those are the things you want to look at when you're picking up a hard drive. You guys can let me know if there's things you think I missed. I didn't really spend as much time getting ready for this. Another thing to consider is hybrid drives. Not really perfect for RAID setups. So a hybrid drive essentially is like a tiny SSD that's built into a standard spinning disk drive. So it's a hybrid. It's a little bit of both. Huge cache that's really fast. You're not going to be able to really do a RAID with that though. So that would be okay for your system if you have to have a 3 terabyte drive for your system. Then that's something you want to think about. And going back to some of you guys brought up some great points with the SSD versus physical. Obviously, the SSD is going to be so much more reliable. These spinning drives, it's just guaranteed they're going to die at some point within a reasonable amount of time. So I've had drives die after a year. The best I've gotten out of a drive is maybe 5 years. So just plan on them breaking. It's like buying a used car. It's not going to be here forever. So those are some things to consider when it comes to brands. Recently, I've been sticking a lot with Seagate. I've always been a big Seagate guy, but every couple years, the things kind of get hairy with one brand or the other. Western Digital, Seagate, both probably good options. I think Toshiba is coming out with some good stuff. HGST is also good. And yeah, so that's some good things to think about. So those are the drives. Let's talk about RAIDs, right? So we're going to hop over to RAID calculator. I'm just going to double check, make sure you guys are seeing all this. Awesome. This website I use all of the time, and it is so handy. So let's dig in and have some fun. Several different options here for your different RAID types. I'm going to run through them very quickly, and this site will really help you figure that out. As an example, let's just set something up here. Let's say we're going to do 4 drives, 1 terabyte each, just to keep it simple, or 1,000 gigabytes roughly. We're going to hit calculate. So RAID 0, this is going to be the fastest option depending on how many drives you have. What RAID 0 does essentially is, let's take our example of 4 different drives. When you send a file over to it, it's going to take that one file, split it into 4 pieces, and write it to the drives. The reason it's fast is instead of writing to one drive, then the next drive, and then the next drive, it's splitting that file into 4 different, streams, if you will. So you're taking full advantage of the speed of those drives. Let's see here. Where's it going with that? Sorry, I'm reading the comments while doing this at the same time, or trying to, and failing, obviously. So that's RAID 0. The problem with RAID 0, and you can see down here, I love this site because it gives you, your speed gain 4 times read and write. So we're just getting, 4x of everything. Fault tolerance, none. That means that if one of those drives fails, your data is gone forever. So we'll cover how this isn't going to be as really an issue at all. But that's RAID 0. RAID 1, I'm going to change this setup a little bit to 2 1 terabyte drives. RAID 1, what? That doesn't make any sense. RAID 1. Okay, here we go. So RAID 1 is going to mirror the drive. So if you send a file to a RAID 1 with 2 drives in it, it's going to copy it to the first drive and then to the second drive. You're not going to gain any write speeds. As we can see down here, you will gain some read speeds because it has those 2 drives to read from. The beauty with a RAID 1 is essentially a backup, right? So you have your single drive, and I used this system for years before I learned about the other RAID configurations. If one drive fails, all your data is exactly copied on the other drive. You can turn everything off, unplug the box, take the drive out, put a fresh drive in, and if you have a RAID enclosure that's hardware, which we'll talk about in a second, it'll automatically rebuild it. So if you're not doing anything right now for hard drives and you just have a hard drive or a bunch of hard drives that aren't backed up, set up a RAID 0 or RAID 1 rather somewhere. That is a great way to get started. It is slower and there's better ways to do things, which we'll get to here in a second. And of course we have that one drive failure with this setup. RAID 5, this is what I personally am using right now. Let's do our same example. 4 drives, 1 terabyte each. RAID 5 is a little, and the rest of these are kind of a mix of the first 2 or first couple. So now we have 3 terabytes for our total capacity, even though we have a total of 4 terabytes. 3 read speed, no write speed gain, and 1 drive failure for our fault tolerance. So you can see why I love this. First of all, we're gaining a decent amount of capacity. With RAID 1, whatever you have as your setup is cut in half, right? So RAID, because it has to do, a backup with that. RAID 5 gives us close to our full amount of capacity, original capacity. We have some read speed, which for editing is really important. I'm willing to let my computer take some time to import stuff. When it comes to reading, I want as fast as possible. Because if you're editing a 4K project on a slightly slower machine, really any machine, and or multiple 4K streams, you need all of the read speed you can get. And then we have that one drive failure. So if one of those drives in my RAID box over here dies, I still have that data. It's not like RAID 0 where everything just explodes and goes up in smoke. Then there's a whole bunch of other ones. 5E, 5EE, RAID 10, which is kind of an interesting one. It's kind of a mix of RAID 0 and RAID 1. And I'll let you guys check these each out individually on your own. But this website is raid-calculator.com. If you just Google RAID calculator, it'll come up. So I love this website. It's really, really handy for checking different configurations before you start throwing money at the problem. So those are the different RAID types. Now let's talk about hardware versus software. I've talked about this in other videos before, but essentially hardware it's either a card you slide into your computer, or it's an internal external box, and it has hardware in it that will tell the drives what to do. There's little switches on the back where you can say, all right, I want this to be a RAID 1, and it says put these switches in this order. The nice thing with hardware is you don't have to touch it, right? It just does what it does. Once you set it up, you can format all your drives and you're good to go. Another nice thing with hardware is if one of those drives fails, the hardware will walk you through what to do. So it'll have a red light or something and saying this drive is dead, please change it. You'll pull it out, put a new one in. It'll automatically say, all right, we got a fresh drive. Let's rebuild this so he doesn't lose any data. So that's hardware. It used to be where hardware was always best no matter what, always faster. Going with software is something I would recommend these days for a couple of reasons. But essentially, software is your computer is managing all of that stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, or don't take this the wrong way. It's not like if you unplug the system or your drives and put it on another computer, it's all gone. It's not specific to your machine. Software RAIDs, once you set them up, I can take my software RAID, which I have right next to me, go to another computer, plug it in, and we're good to go. What I like about software RAID is there's a lot, you can see what's going on with the software. And you don't have to use it every single time you pull up your drives. But the beauty is I use Soft RAID to create my soft RAIDs, which is a great application for the Mac. And that will constantly monitor things for me. And that's software, and it saved my bacon already. Just recently it said, hey, we're starting to see some funky business on this drive over here. I can click on it and actually have it blink the drive on the enclosure. And it'll say, you've probably got a couple months before this falls apart. So it can start to see before things get really ugly. So that's why I like Soft RAID. It's also really cheap because when you buy hardware RAIDs, you're tacking on at least $100 to the problem. So you can save a lot of money by getting a device that doesn't have a hardware RAID built in. An example of this, let's just look at some stuff, right? Are we still on Chrome over here? Awesome. Mediasonic RAID. So here is a hardware RAID. So Pro RAID from Mediasonic. Pretty affordable, $150, 4 bays, you know, really nice. Mediasonic, what are they called? Pro Box. And this is the software RAID version right here. So $100. There is no hardware RAID here. You still have a lot of great features, but the software is going to be controlling it. Otherwise, if you just plug drives into here, it's all going to show up as, you know, you'll see your individual drives. Hardware RAID, a little more expensive. It has a controller in there. Mediasonic is really affordable. If you get into some other stuff, I know I saw you guys throwing around some Synology and those guys. Great stuff, gonna cost a lot more. Another reason to go with software is once you pay this for the software, and you don't have to purchase software for this. There's free software out there. You can do a lot of it on your OS without any software. But the nice thing about going with software is it's more affordable, and you don't have to keep buying hardware, because what will happen inevitably is you buy a 2-bay or a 4-bay, then you need to upgrade to an 8-bay or whatever, so on and so forth. You can get pretty expensive. So I love these Mediasonics, these $100 dealios. I've got like 3 or 4 of them around here, and it's great because if you're like, man, we need space now, you can just quickly throw something together without having to sell one of your children. So that's external or hardware versus software. We'll get into some specific setups here in a second. I want to quickly mention internal versus external. So if you have an iMac, or if you have really anything from Apple, except for their older Mac Pros, real quick, by the way, hit me up with, are you guys Mac or PC? My guess is there's a hefty amount of Apple users here. But the reason I'm asking is I'm going to build a new Hackintosh, not a new complete one, just a new case, get a new case. And you can do a lot of this stuff without doing this whole external dealio. So if you're building a PC, you might consider looking for a 10-bay case, 10 hard drive bays, and then you can build this whole system inside of your machine without all this external stuff. Of course, as I'm seeing, you guys are all Apple users, or a lot of you guys are Apple folks, so it doesn't really matter unless you have an ancient Mac Pro. But something to consider. If you're a PC guy, consider doing all this. You don't have to have some external box to do this. You can do this all inside of your machine. Okay, right. So that is internal, external. Let's put something together. Let's start from the beginning. And a lot of these are going to be software, but hardware is an option as well. So let's say you're starting from something, or you have hard drives all over the place. A really safe way to go is a RAID 1. 2 drives, one backing up to the other. So something I did for years on the road, so when I was traveling and importing footage and I needed some kind of semi-safe way to do this, is just, let's see, 1 terabyte USB portable hard drive. Bam. So we got a 1 terabyte here. Let's check these out. Make sure you guys are seeing this too. Awesome. So this is a $55 1 terabyte USB 3 drive. You get 2 of those, okay? You plug them both into your computer, you format them, and you create a RAID 1 with those. What I used to do is just put a little foam in between them and then gaff tape them together. Now you've got your data when you're importing to that is backed up, or there's not backed up, but you have a RAID 0, so the data is on, you have 2 copies of it with that setup. It's going to be decently fast and it's really cheap. You can scale this up, do 2 terabytes for $70. So that's a really, really affordable. I see people talking about Drobo. We'll come back to that. In short, I would really recommend avoiding them. But back to this. Portable drives, great way to go. I can't tell you how often I use that little setup. It's really cheap. So like $100, you've got a terabyte of semi-safe, you know, storage to work with. So you could scale that up and get larger portables and just get 2 of them. Another thing you could do is look for a dual 2.5 enclosure. I've seen these come down in cost. So this one would work, $80, and you can slap 2 2.5 drives in there. There's a bunch of these out there. Oh, there's one I saw that was really cheap. So $40 for this guy. USB 3, and this one is a hardware RAID, so you don't have to worry about software. It's got can do RAID 0 and RAID 1. So that's a really simple, cheap way to go. The problem is, like we talked about earlier, you're only getting half of the space because it has to have 2 drives, or you know, to copy each other, and the speeds are really rough. So now let's talk about RAID 0. Same thing. Take 2 hard drives and you're going to double the speed. So you could take those same 2 1 terabytes we talked about and create a RAID 0. You're going to double the reads and double the writes. Problem is, we don't have, you know, if one of them fails, we lose all our data. So you get a 3rd drive that backs it up. So in our example of our 1 terabyte drives, let's take this one for example, you'd buy 2 1 terabyte drives. Create a RAID 0. Now you've got 2 terabytes of much faster than a single drive RAID. You also buy a 2 terabyte 3rd drive. And then your RAID 0, which shows up as a single drive, backs up to that other drive. You could use Time Machine. I love Carbon Copy Cloner. There's other software out there. So for a setup like this, you could have automatically backup every day, several times a day, once a week, whatever you wanted. That's another budget option. Now let's jump into some big stuff. Let's get into some larger setups. So I'm going to pretty much build what I have right next to me on Amazon. We're going to start with the Mediasonic 4-bay. So this is the non-RAID. One other thing to look for is if you see something that says NAS, that's a good sign for those are engineered and designed to be running more often. So like I've got a couple server machines that are constantly backing things up, so you want nice drives for that if possible. Okay, so there's a 4 terabyte. There's probably cheaper ones out there, but this will do for now. So this one, just search for rotations per minute. This is better, although it's 2 terabyte. We'll just stick with this one for now, even though it's maybe not the correct speeds. So we're gonna get 4 of these. This is probably a slower drive. Another hint is it's not showing the actual rotation per minute, but let's pretend for now that it's a. No, let's do this the right way, Caleb. It's not corner cut corners. Sidebar, 7,200 rotations per minute. I think these are the ones these are the ones I have. So these are nice, and I talked about this in my hard drive workflow recently, these particular drives, because 4 terabytes, 7,200 RPM, and they are kind of set up for a NAS system, so they're able to handle working long periods of time. All right, that looks great. So we're going to add, uh-oh, is there not many of these? Way to ruin the demonstration, Amazon. Let's just add that. No thanks. Cart. 4 of those, please. Only one of these available. Well, you guys can do the math. We've got $100 for our box, $600-ish for that setup. Now, what does that give us, right? Going back here, we're doing 4 drives, going back to RAID calculator. RAID 5. Now we've got 12 terabytes of capacity, 3 times read speed, so that's really going to help out with 4K. I edit on this exact system we just set up all the time, and it works great. No problems with 4K at all. No write gain, which again, we're okay with that, and 1 drive failure. So we can lose a drive and we're safe. So you can start to see where this gets really interesting, and you can mix up the drive capacities. You don't want to mix them up, but you could check out some different capacities and see what that would look like. Now, drives are also getting really affordable now for capacity. So they have 10 terabytes. If you want to get really crazy, let's just go to this, the Iron Wolf drives over here from Seagate, 10 terabyte. These are really solid. These are newer drives. They're designed, these Iron Wolves are designed to be running a lot. Let's just add 4 to the cart. Go back here, get rid of this guy. So for $1,500, what does that give us? 10,000. That's 100,000. 30 terabytes. So that's pretty solid, right? And you can mix up, do different setups. Another one I've been meaning to try is with RAID 0. So we're going to get wicked speeds with this. Let's do 2 terabyte. 4 2 terabyte drives in RAID 0. This is going to give us 8 terabytes of capacity, 4x read and write. So now you're getting some banging speeds. And if you got some nicer drives, so 7,200 RPM, 10,000, or if you went with an SSD for this, this would be ridiculous speeds. You'd be cruising comfortably doing red 8K, no problem. Right. So those are some options. Now, I want to get back to redundancy versus backup because this is crucial to understand. Redundancy is what we've been seeing with, the RAIDs that have that fault tolerance. So just an example, going back here, we have OneDrive fault tolerance. That's not a backup. Using a RAID is not a backup. It's redundant. So a true backup ensures that if I take a hammer and smash that box right next to me, I still have my data. For that, going with something large capacity that can back up your whole system is a great option. So let's get back into an example. Let's say we want to do this RAID 0, right? Which has 0 redundancy. Let's go back to that. All right, so 4 drives, 2 terabytes each, no fault tolerance. What I would recommend you do is calculate the total capacity of your RAID, which in this case is 8 terabytes. Now I'm going to hop over to Amazon, 8 terabyte external drive. Boom, $179 for 8 terabytes. And then I would just put them right next to that other box. And now you can use software to back up your RAID. And for a RAID 0 with spinning drives that aren't as necessarily reliable, I'd probably back this up at least once a day when you're not using it. And Carbon Copy Cloner and software like that can do a great job in saying, hey, he's off to lunch, let's back up things. So with this setup, now we've got our wicked, crazy RAID 0 setup with a backup drive, and we're safe. You would also want to consider cloud, which using Backblaze is a great service. I use them, $5 a month per computer. That includes everything attached to it, or some service like that. They're not a sponsor. None of these people are sponsors. So I'm gonna make sure we're covering all the bases. I've been not looking at the chat much, so let's get into some questions. What's up, Max? How you doing? He knows what's going on with drives, I'm sure, with all this PC building he's doing. Hands-on 3.1 enclosure. I haven't. This machine right next to me doesn't have USB 3.1 Pixel 5, but it's better for sure. Will this be good for 4K editing from CTC Films? It's going to depend on your machine. The setup I talked about works. So essentially, if you have 4 drives of any capacity that can handle or have 7200 RPM with USB 3, you're good to go. That's been working for me. But I have those 4 drives in a RAID, so I'm gaining some speed performance on the reads. If you have some slower stuff, RAID 0 will help you out with the speeds. Let's see. Any other questions or specific setup if you have a situation where you're looking for some kind of setup? Why not RAID 6 from Magnat 7? Well, let's take a look, shall we? Let's go back to something simple. 4 drives, 1 terabyte each. Here's your RAID 5, right? And RAID 6. So RAID 6, you're going to have, as we can just see there, less capacity. You're going to gain a drive fault tolerance, which is awesome, and you're going to lose some speed. So you just got to juggle what the pros and cons are. Some people, I'm not saying RAID 6 is bad. If you want that extra drive fault tolerance, that's, that would be something to consider for sure. Speed test. Let's do it right now. I have done a speed test. Let me get OBS hooked up here. We'll change this one. I'm just going to change this right in the software. Drive speed test. Okay. Can you guys see that? Do you see black magic? I'm going to hop over. Select my drive projects. We'll do a 5 gig stress test starting. I don't think my Final Cut is open in the background. I don't think that should be doing too much. So our writes aren't going to be as good as our reads. All right, so there's our reads. And these drives in here are 2 to 3 years old. So there you go. And what I love about the software, let me just make sure you guys can see this. Switch over to OBS. Awesome. You can see the check marks. So I can see, I can go up to 2160p, 30 frames per second at ProRes 422 HQ, and I'm good to go. So this is really handy, free piece of software, and definitely something I'd recommend. To Drobo. Things may have changed in the last 3 years or so. The reason I don't like Drobo we're talking about a main machine to edit off of, is it's not a RAID system. It's its own proprietary system. And I've heard so many horror stories. If you want to get scared, then go look into that. But Drobo horror stories where if something goes wrong with that box, with the software in that box, with the hardware in that box, you can't just fix it. Like a RAID system, if something happens to a RAID, if you are too scared to touch it, you can take it to a data recovery center, and it's kind of a universal system, if you will. Whereas Drobo, especially if you're throwing all kinds of different drives, which is kind of how they advertise it a lot of the time, isn't necessarily a good way to go. And we're talking about the Drobos where you just slap random drives, doesn't matter capacity, speed, and it just works it out. So that's the reason I don't recommend them for critical data. Now I would recommend them if you are using it as a backup. So let's say I want to back up my RAID right next to me. That's where a Drobo could be handy. The Drobo, I could just jam all my drives in it and it could handle it. If you want that kind of system where you can throw a ton of drives into a box and it just shows up as one drive, consider going with that Mediasonic that we looked at and setting it up as a JBOD, which is just a bunch of disks, and it can be set up where it shows up as one drive. So in the next room over, I have my server, which is like a 30-some terabyte setup that has all my old projects backed up on. And I also have a backup for that, which I use tons of random drives. There's an 8 terabyte in there, there's a 2 terabyte in there, and you can set it up where you're still getting all the capacity, but it's just a bunch of random drives. And if one fails, the whole thing kind of goes up in smoke, but it's a backup. So I then throw a new drive in there, rebuild it, and we're good to go. So at the end of the day, RAID is highly recommended if you're not using an SSD. You're going to get much better speeds, redundancy in most cases, and capacity is still going to be pretty solid. From there, remember, redundancy is not a backup. Redundancy is a nice thing to have that'll help you sleep a little better at night, but if lightning strikes your house and it goes up in flames, or somebody knocks over your box and all your drives explode, that's not a backup. Bring in a backup, whether that be cloud, or an even better solution is cloud and an external drive, an external something. You can even like plug something into it, back it up, put it in a safe, whatever works for you guys. And yeah, at the end of the day, you can do this very affordably, as we looked at. So you don't have to spend $2,000, $5,000 to get a decent system set up. Right on. So how are we doing in the comments? I have been completely tuned out for the most part here, so I need to get back in here and see what's up. It's a little hairier to deal with that on a Mac, but if you're doing a Hackintosh or a PC build, or if that's an option in future machines, then definitely go for it. The speeds are ridiculous. I haven't looked into free backup software recently, but there's got to be something out there for that. Let's see. Is it worth it to have an SSD to work on your footage, and then when you're done, move it to a bigger hard drive? Absolutely. This is from Miguel. If you're dealing with smaller files, an SSD is a great option. The problem is cost per gigabyte. What I would recommend, and this is a great place, I should have mentioned this earlier, to check out where to buy drives and what you're spending per gig, is PC Part Picker. Oops. Oh dear, I messed that up, didn't I? Sorry about that, guys. PCPartPicker.com. Essentially, you can go there and you can search. I messed up my Windows. You can search for hard drives, and it'll show you how much per dollar you're spending. Great way to quickly dial in and say, I want an 8 terabyte drive that has this speed or higher, yada, yada, yada. But yeah, for smaller stuff, SSD backed up is great, and you don't really need the RAID thing as much because the speeds are so good already. So what kind of cache set do you have? I think mine's 128 for the drives that I use. I haven't done really a lot of testing to see if a bigger cache makes a huge difference or not. I don't think it makes as much a difference for video editing, because when we edit, we're just like, I need this video file to play, and then I'm going to cut it up. A cache is good when you're pulling up tons of different small files, and some of them you use more regularly. That's where a cache really helps you. So you might be able to skimp on the cache without as much problems. If someone knows better, definitely let me know. I'd be interested to hear. Any drive speed test software? There is one out there that everybody seems to use. Essentially, it's what people take a screenshot of when you go to buy a drive on Amazon. So I'm going to check it out here, try to find it for you. See if I can hunt that down for you. But if you Google it, I'm sure there's a bunch of, dudes, drive people, like really hardcore hard drive spec people, are really intense. So if you want to dive deep into this world and figure out so much more than what I'm talking about, there's people out there that'll help you. There's a lot of wild people who are really into that stuff. How about paid solutions for backup for Windows system? So yeah, if you guys know about Windows options, help Magnat out there. That's a good idea from Pixel 5. Do a fire drill. What happens? Just imagine that everything on one enclosure is gone, and that should get the wheels going. I just pretend all the time that things are always breaking and preparing to break, and oftentimes they are. So you definitely want to make sure you have some kind of solid backup system. Okay. Any other questions with drives or non-drive stuff? Say my name, Potato RC, heart, heart. Okay. Yes, so for people, I'm sorry I didn't have the link set up ahead of time. I will add that to the description of the video once we wrap up here and give you some ideas for that stuff. And then definitely check out my video I've done on my hard drive workflow, or video production hard drive workflow video. It's a couple weeks old. That has almost everything we've talked about here. Yeah, yeah, I'm paranoid. And the reason is, answering this comment here, is I've had so many issues in the past. I've lost data. I think most of us have. And I've also run into situations where I don't have enough space, and then I start to get stupid. When I did my first camera guide, the GH4, I'm sorry, it's been one of those days. I was creating so much content for that, hours and hours of footage, and I was starting to run out of space and having to like buy random drives to make it work. So once, either in the middle of that or when I was done, I was like, that's it. I'm coming up with something where I have plenty of space. I'm safe. There's a process, so I don't have to lose data, because that's the worst feeling in the world, when you finish a shoot and you realize you don't have something, or something was deleted along the post-production process. Okay. Right. Looking for some comments here for questions. Yeah, moving content around, stuff around is really scary. There's software out there that's great for essentially cloning a folder to another folder, and it's bit for bit. I would definitely do that. If you're moving a lot of big files, find some kind of software to help you do that. Don't just through Finder start dragging stuff from that I'm not thinking of as another RAID system that's good. I'm really getting into the QNAP stuff. Eventually I want to have, they have a 4, maybe make sure get this right. There's 4 Thunderbolt 3 jacks on the back of this one unit they have. So you could load that puppy up with drives, hook it up to 4 different machines, have 4 editors working on different projects on the same device at the same time with ridiculous speeds. So that's the end goal. I was thinking about, like, I'm going to build this server and have, you know, cat whatever everywhere and have like a 10 gigabit setup, but that's really expensive. In this setup, you could buy a couple Thunderbolt 3 optical cables that can go super long and just run it through your building and have a couple editors. So I'm looking forward to that. That sounds like fun. It's going to be expensive, but way less expensive than running copper through building. Max Yuryev is also looking into QNAP. I don't have enough people working on projects enough at the same time to need it yet, but that's definitely something I'm looking into and looking forward to. They have lots of other stuff that's not as expensive as well. Okay, any other questions, folks? How good is this utility for setting up a RAID or a regular hard drive enclosure? For just formatting stuff, it's great. For RAIDs, I believe it's still semi-castrated, if you will, where you can only do RAID 0 and 1. If someone can back me up on that, let me know. I haven't used it in a while, but I know Yosemite or El Capitan, they kind of killed off all the other RAID stuff, so that's where soft RAID really helps out. But there's probably other software out there. I just remember when I first looked, at one point, it was either soft RAID or you're in trouble. Mobile SSD drives, I've had good success with them. I wouldn't maybe just buy a random plastic box that says SSD. I'd probably get my own enclosure, and I need to set this back up here. But that's another thing you can do is just buy an SSD and a cheap USB or Thunderbolt enclosure, and then you would be good to go. So I need to fix my Chrome got all jacked up, so now it's showing this other software here. So yeah, going back to Chrome. There we go. Okay, so that's back. 2.5 millimeter or inch hard drive enclosure. So there's one USB 3 for $9. So there you go. That wouldn't be a terrible way to go. So there's nicer stuff than this one, but that goes to show you this. The USB 3 stuff is just so affordable now. It's ridiculous. All right. 2 questions. Or wait, 2 answers. Let's see. Yeah, I would agree with Pixel 5. You don't want to mix and match stuff with a RAID. You want to make sure you have the same capacity, the same speeds, and preferably the same, you know, make and model and all that stuff. Make sure it's the same, because with a RAID often it'll default to the weakest thing. So if you have 2 terabytes and 1 terabyte, most of the setups you're going to get, it's going to treat them all like 1 terabytes. So Adam asked about the QNAP, what it can be used for. It can be anything. It can be a hard drive, an ingest station. The beauty with those is it's a NAS system, so you can also access it. It's like your own personal Dropbox. With the one I was talking about, multiple people can connect to it at the same time and be working off of it at the same time. They have several different models and some great stuff. All right. Let's see. Any benefits to using a 4-bay RAID 5 setup with SSDs in a Thunderbolt 3 enclosure? No, that would be ridiculously fast. 4-bay and RAID 5 setup with SSDs. Yeah, you could totally do that. In a RAID 5 would be good. RAID 0 would be like so overkill, I would imagine, unless you're shooting on the most advanced camera system ever. And that's another thing to consider, guys, is if you're going to go RAID 0, you're not losing capacity at all. It's stacking it all up. So another great move is get 4 fast, cheap drives, throw it in a RAID 0. So I would recommend you figure out what's the minimum you need of drive space for one project. And I recommend having an enclosure setup for current stuff, and then a backup thing that can be slower, and an archive gig SSDs. Throw it in a RAID 0, or you know, 4 500 gig drives or 4 1 terabytes. Set it up in a RAID 0. Get a backup drive, and now you're banging really fast speeds. You've got your backup. You're good to go. You don't have to have 4 terabyte drives. I only do that because every once in a while I start doing one of these camera guides or some kind of guide that I'm going to end up selling, and it's going to be hours long, and that's where like the terabytes just get away from me. So for me personally, 12 terabytes is good to go. I mean, I could easily get away with probably 8 or so. Yeah, great point by John. Some of these NAS boxes are more for working off of Ethernet, so you got to pay attention to the I/O. Not all of them have Thunderbolt or USB 3. So yeah. Oh, cool. So I guess Robo supports RAID 6 now, which is really good news. Any cheap 4-bay NAS system? Unless you create your own NAS, I don't really know much about NAS stuff, or on the really solid stuff. Let's see. Yes, with a NAS, you can have all of your stuff in one location and it can back up somewhere else. There's a lot of flexibility. It's going to come down to speed of your connections and all that good stuff, though. That's not a bad idea. Set up a NAS or something like that, which is just, by the way, network attached storage. That's all it really stands for. at a buddy's house or something, and then you could back things up like that. But at that point, I mean, if you've got the speed for that, I would recommend just doing backblaze. Unlimited storage. If everything blows up, you just get your drive shipped to you, which is great. SSD drives versus NAS drives in a RAID setup. If you have the money, SSDs always, but you can still do a lot of damage with just NAS drives. The beauty with NAS drives that say NAS on them is they know you're going to be running them for long periods of time, or they're going to be spinning a lot. So that's another layer of security, which is nice. Take it easy, DVZN. Thanks for joining us. What do you need for building a NAS? Ask YouTube. There's a lot of complexity with that. It's going to come down to software, what you're going to use it for, how the software is going to communicate with the hardware, all that good stuff. So any final questions, and then we're going to wrap this baby up. Oh, that stinks. I didn't know Backblaze doesn't ship outside of the US. Will there be a video on LED? I've got a bunch of LED videos. A couple things I'd ask you to do. Number one, would like to see coming up either in the regular videos or here in the streams. Do you guys want to do interviews, bring some other people on, mix things up a little bit? And maybe I'll consider, I'm totally willing to make all what's going on behind the scenes here at some point soon. So thank you guys for watching again. I will see you tomorrow in another video, the following Tuesday in another video, and future live streams on Wednesday nights. Have a great evening and take care.